Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Canadian Premier League on YouTube. We now finally know the teams that our CPL representatives will be playing in the 2025 Concacaf Champions Cup. Charlie O'Connor-Clark here alongside Mitchell Tierney. We know that both CPL teams, Forge and Cavalry FC, will be headed to Mexico in February. Something that I'm sure a lot of us would love to do every February. That's 2 years in a row now for Forge. But getting into it in more detail, Cavalry, they take on Pumas from Mexico City, while Forge will be headed to the mountains of Monterrey to play CF Monterrey, also known as Rayados. Mitchell, I'm going to put you on the spot here and just give me your immediate reaction to what it was like seeing these two CPL teams drawn and both matched up with massive Mexican clubs.
Yeah, I mean, exciting again. Obviously, these are two really global giants, but certainly giants of the North American game that we're going to see Canadian Premier League clubs go up against. You know, teams entering year 7, and they're playing against teams entering year 78 and 70, respectively. If you look at Monterrey and Pumas, so very, very exciting, and yeah, I think about as exciting as you could have hoped for this draw for both clubs historically, and in terms of what they're going to get to go up against.
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen Forge play Mexican teams twice in the past. They played Cruz Azul in their CONCACAF Champions League, as it was known at the time, debut in 2022. Last year, they went to Guadalajara to play Chivas. And this year, it's going to be Monterrey. So they've been to 3 different Mexican cities in this tournament, but all very, very difficult matchups. Meanwhile, Cavalry last year also made their debut in the competition as the regular season title winners in 2023. They played Orlando City from Major League Soccer. We're still looking for our first win from a CPL team in the Champions Cup, but you know, these are massive clubs that we're playing against. These are very difficult games, and in many respects, it's the quality of the competition, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, there's going to be no easy draw today, certainly. I mean, it's called the Champions Cup for a reason. These are all champions of their respective leagues or clubs who are thereabouts. So, yeah, it's always going to be a massive challenge, but that's why you want to play in these games. These are opportunities to go, not just for the clubs, but for the organizations to go and meet some of the best in the region, compare themselves, and, you know, obviously we're still waiting for it, but one of these days beat one of those clubs and what that will mean for the Canadian Premier League.
Yeah, exactly. So we're obviously going to be joined later in the show by both Tommy Wheeldon Jr. of Cavalry FC and Bobby Smyrniotis of Forge FC, and they'll give us perhaps their more intelligent, more nuanced takes on the teams that they've drawn and what it means for their teams to be competing in this tournament once again. But for now, Mitch, let's just get a little bit quickly into the 2 teams that our clubs have drawn, starting with Cavalry getting Pumas. You know, they've won the CONCACAF Champions Cup 3 times, but not since 1989. You know, they were kind of agonizingly defeated in the 2022 final by the Seattle Sounders, which a lot of us might remember. They qualified as one of the top teams in the Liga MX aggregate table for the not the current Apertura season that's about to wrap up, but the 23-24 Apertura Clausura. They haven't actually won a Mexican League title since 2011, but still one of the biggest teams in the region. Mitchell, what, from your very, very brief ability to whip around Google, have you managed to figure out about what Cavalry might be up against here?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, a club like you mentioned with a really solid history and a good history in this competition, even if you know it's been a while since they've obviously won one. I mean, this will it's the case with a lot of Mexican sides, but obviously this will mean altitude for Cavalry playing out of Mexico City, which is always a difficult proposition and one that will certainly factor in a big way into their preparations for this. For this competition. Yeah, team with a lot of attacking quality, especially, you know, Cesar Huerta, you know, one of the top scorers in Liga MX during the Apertura. Funes Mori, a player that a lot of Canadian fans will certainly know with his time in Mexico, hasn't been as prolific in recent years, but a multiple time Concacaf champion. So a guy who really knows what it takes to get this team far. So yeah, I mean, certainly a team with a lot of ability, a lot of internationals, as you would expect from any Liga MX team that reaches this far reaches this competition. And this is going to be a heck of a test for a Cavalry team that will come in with a lot of confidence themselves with what they were able to do on the final day of this CPL season, lifting the North Star Cup for the first time, but one that's are going to get quite the test for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously we should mention, for those who don't know, Cavalry FC qualifying for this competition by winning the North Star Cup as Canadian Premier League champions for the first time in their history in 2024. So congratulations, of course, to them. Mitch, this is one I'm excited for. I've just been looking a little bit into the stadium that Pumas play, and it's one of those kind of more old school looking ones with an athletic track around it. It's just a big open bowl. This is going to be a lot of fun. As you mentioned, Pumas, a very, very historic club, 70 years old. And just definitely going to be a massive, massive day for Cavalry when they head down there. Forge, meanwhile, likewise, they go to Monterrey. And speaking of stadiums, if you have not seen the Monterrey Stadium, I believe it's hosting a World Cup match in 2026 or several, I assume. Look this up. It is one of the most beautiful football stadiums in the entire world. There's an end of it where you can just see the mountains coming over the top. Certainly, if I was to find myself there, I'd be distracted by that most of the game. So that's probably why I'm not a footballer.
Yeah,
but
it's a good thing you're not playing center back.
Yeah, exactly. I'd just be staring up the whole time. Much like some certain Premier League center backs who do that anyway and watch the ball sail over their heads, like Diego Carlos. But anyway. Back to the topic, CF Monterrey. Mitchell, what do we know about them?
Yeah, I mean, fourth most wins of any team in the competition's history, and critically, they've done so recently. I think they have 2 of the past 6 tournaments, the only club to do so, to have won that. So obviously, that's significant. And this is the team that's still very, very good. They're taking on, I believe, Club America in just a few days' time in the Apertura final. That being on Thursday. Okay. So obviously, a team who's still very, very good and, could come into this riding high off of a very big trophy. Yeah, I mean, you look at the roster as well. There's a lot of players who, Sergio Canella is obviously a Spanish international, Hector Moreno, Lucas Ocampos, Jesus Manuel Corona. Like, these are all names that, international fans will know. And, as well, obviously, to make it interesting, a lot of CPL connections as well. A lot of Monterrey players playing throughout the league, not least of which is Daniel Parra of Forge. We'll see if he's back for this coming year, but obviously on loan from Monterrey this season, Orlando Botello and Josue Martinez as well. So a lot of interesting CPL connections with Monterrey, and a lot of history and a lot of history of winning, both in the CONCACAF level and in Liga MX as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned, Daniel Parra with Forge, he is on Forge have an option to extend his loan for a year. They haven't yet confirmed whether or not they'll be taking that, but that would be an interesting dynamic. Just quickly, Monterrey, a name that maybe we wouldn't have expected to be talking about on this show, but their manager is Martin Demichelis. If you remember him from Bayern and Manchester City and being a World Cup runner-up in 2014, I think the year was. This is a team that has won this competition recently in 2019 and 2021. Last year, they were huge in this tournament. I think they went as far as the semifinals where they lost to Columbus Crew. But in doing so, they defeated and eliminated Lionel Messi's Inter Miami in the quarterfinal in, I think, Messi's first club venture to Mexico. We're very shortly going to be joined by Cavalry FC head coach Tommy Wheeldon Jr., who will give us his immediate thoughts on Pumas and that draw. And I think he may be ready to go now. So if so, I think we can bring him in just to give us some of his thoughts. Tommy, how are you?
Good. How you doing?
We're good, Tommy. Thank you for joining us for a couple of minutes here. I'm sure you were watching with your breath held for a few minutes there during the draw, but it is Pumas. It is a trip to Mexico. What's your first thought on that?
Excited. These like the Pumas is one of the biggest clubs in Mexico with a very storied history, and we talked as a staff and players about the next challenge, something that we haven't experienced yet, and that's an opportunity to go to Mexico City and play against one of what was known as the Big Four Mexican sides. Like I said, I know of them in their storied history, got a brief awareness of them, but now the studying starts. And this is a great chance now in our off season, as we're getting ready for the next one, is to start watching, seeing what they're about, because they're going to be our first competitive game.
Yeah, and Tommy, you said the studying starts, but obviously you guys got some lessons as well from last year's Champions Cup run. A different situation playing an MLS side, but what were some of the key takeaways from that run, from the preparations that you guys will put into place, as you build towards this competition?
Well, you have less runway with this one, right? With the Mexican side, you play 2 weeks earlier. We had the 2 weeks later. Forge obviously played their games, and you have to get into fitness quicker. So for us, one of the lessons learned is our preseason has to begin before that, so we can actually get our iron sharper, because where we are, we're training indoors and there's no real competition. Even the university sides that are local to us they're out of season. So what we've got to do is venture out, go down south, and we've already arranged some games down in California, and we'll have a different preseason and approach to this Concacaf, because we know we have to be sharper earlier than we were last year.
Yeah, Tommy, that's a great point. And I mean, it feels like the season didn't end that long ago. I think yesterday was exactly a month from when you were lifting the North Star Cup at Atco Field. But there is no rest for the wicked in this sport. You guys have already announced some of your roster moves, the players that are under contract, the players that you have options on. How far along are you in the process of preparing to enter preseason in January, and how important is it to you guys that it seems like a large core of that championship team will be back?
And that's it. Championships are built on core. Dynasties are built on cores. And for us is, we're going to try and keep as many of the group together, because everyone had a different role to play. Some were the stars that made teams of the years and individual awards, and some were the unsung heroes, So you like Shamik Shomes, Diego Gutierrez did a lot of work behind the scenes that helped the lads do what they needed to do. So we'll be bringing a lot of the guys back. We'll be adding in a little sprinkling of some things. And obviously, like anyone, in a cap-based league, you got to be willing to let others go on to new ventures themselves. So that's what we're in right now, as well as obviously preparing for our pre-season, but encouraging the lads to have a little bit of time off. But now the draw's out, that's probably the switch they needed to get into right. We're a month or two away from actually playing these guys and preparing for them.
Tommy, obviously it won't be feasible to play this match at Atco Field again, which is obviously disappointing for you guys. But that grass, you'll hope it lasts until the final next year. So maybe not good to start it in February. But what are some of the important factors for that in terms of making wherever you will play that home leg still an advantage for you guys?
Yeah, of course it is. I mean, you've got to look at the conditions. We played late into November, and unfortunately, the frost hit us a week or two later, and we don't have the time or the infrastructure to put in the needs that we need for this CONCACAF fixture, right? It's not just the grass and the ground. We have to put the undersoil heating in. It's the whole stadium and the entry. So the timelines and the calendar against us, but with success becomes other challenges. And these are new challenges we embrace. We got to look at venues out in the West, whether, because we looked at McMahon Stadium locally, their turf is being taken up. We looked at CONCACAF to play CONCACAF at Commonwealth. They couldn't guarantee it. So the three options really we've got are in BC Place, Swangard Stadium, and obviously where we played last year at Starlight. And the people at Starlight and even Pacific were very helpful in trying to help us put that on. So they're the options. For us, you want to bring the Mexican side and make it as uncomfortable as possible. They're used to playing in the heat in these big stadiums. Sometimes that small, more intense atmosphere might be better. So we've got to look at that.
I mean, I'm remembering the rainy atmosphere we had at Starlight Stadium last year, and I do think that would be still fairly uncomfortable for a Mexican side. Tommy, one more for you. I just want to talk about last year and maybe the ways that your team kind of learned. It started in CONCACAF, playing those big games, learning to play at that level, and then it finished the season playing so well in those big games. Is that kind of maybe an evolution that you went through that year, is learning about, being at your best in the big game when it matters?
100%. I said, I think you and I have had many chats on I think we know what it takes. The league will always be the hardest to win because it's a marathon and you've got to go to all corners of the country. But I think we know the recipe on how to sustain that through the course of the season. Reality is, with a slow start, we were still only 2 points away from defending the shield. This year, though, we learned to play in the big games. We beat Vancouver FC when we had 10 men. That was a game early on in the season. We were 2-1 at home to Whitecaps, beat them 1-0 at their place. All these lessons, even though early on in the season when we weren't having the run, we were getting reps at these games. So when halfway through the season we weren't in the playoff numbers, we said every game played like a playoff game. Every game, 3 points became massive for us. So that pressure to perform under those conditions was exactly what Sharpen does for going into playoffs. And as you see now, we played very, very well in both games.
Is the feeling of being a CPL champion and winning a trophy in that last day what you thought it would be after all the years when you didn't have that?
Well, I think I said before, the Shield's harder to win, but this one's way more fun. It is because, but difference with the winning the last game of the season, it took us 2 games to win it, not 28 games to win it. And in 2 games, you can celebrate, the champagne can flow, and you leave the season, empty your lockers, say goodbye to the lads, and you're doing it on the back of a win, not going, oh my God, we've got work to do to win or play the next game. We're not waiting 6 months for our next challenge. So yeah, way more fun winning the last game of the season, that's for sure.
Yeah, I would certainly imagine. Anyway, Tommy, thank you so much for giving us a couple minutes today. I'm sure you're excited to get to work watching every second of Puma's season, and also excited for some Mexican sunshine in February. And we will, I'm sure, talk to you very soon.
Sounds good.
Thank you very much, Tommy Wheeldon Jr., manager of Cavalry FC, who now know that their road through the Concacaf Champions Cup begins with a home leg somewhere and then goes through Mexico City and Pumas. Mitchell, we will also be joined by Bobby Smyrniotis fairly shortly, but just while we've got a second here, why don't we look at the draw as a whole? The Concacaf Champions Cup, obviously there's a lot more to talk about than just the 2 CPL teams, because there are 27 teams in this tournament. You can see the bracket on the screen there. What's that?
Get out your magnifying glass here.
Yeah, I can't see that, so I'm reading off my own notes, which I'll show you in a second when the graphic comes down. But let's leave it up for now because we got some big matchups, some MLS on MLS with LAFC in Colorado and Inter Miami and Sporting Kansas City. The Vancouver Whitecaps are playing Saprissa, big Costa Rican team, and don't look now, but the winner of that tie will play the winner of Monterrey and Forge. So maybe a little bit of Canadian, inter-Canadian action in that side. There are interesting games everywhere. RSL playing Herediano, Cincinnati playing Motagua. Mitchell, are there any of these matchups or potential matchups that stand out to you immediately?
I think, well, certainly Miami and Sporting Kansas City will be one a lot of people will be watching for obvious reasons. Kind of that whole bracket right there with LAFC and Colorado. Like there's a lot of MLS teams
and Columbus on that side.
Yeah, exactly. That's basically an MLS Cup playoff reboot. So that will be that'll be very interesting. Real Salt Lake Herediano could be a really good one as well with the MLS Cup winners Galaxy waiting. Obviously, we've seen what Herediano can do in this competition, having played Pacific. So yeah, that's going to be an intriguing one. And, having all 3 Canadian teams in the same kind of area of the bracket. We'll see if anything shakes out there. Obviously, Canadian teams have never met each other in this competition, I don't believe. So that would be a pretty special thing to happen.
Yeah, I mean, Forge have never played the Whitecaps in the Canadian Championship yet, but maybe their first meeting could possibly be on the continental stage, which would be pretty funny. But always an exciting competition. There's also the possibility for a Club America Chivas round of 16 game as well. Anyway, we will maybe touch on some of this bracket again in a second. I wasn't lying, by the way. I actually drew out my own bracket as it was being done.
Do you have a bracket challenge?
You know what? That's a good idea. Maybe I will do it, but I'd be struggling to go with my brain over my heart for that one. But anyway, without further ado, as promised, we also have a very special guest in Forge FC head coach Bobby Smyrniotis. Bobby, it looks like you're in your office at Tim Hortons Field, which I think you maybe never leave.
No, this is actually my home office. That's why there's a little bit of decoration in it.
Okay, so the work comes home with you then.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
Bobby, let's just start with what your initial reaction was when that ball was drawn. You kind of looked at your spot on the bracket and found out that you guys are headed to Monterrey.
Yeah, it's one of those teams you kind of have on your list that you'd like to play. When we look at the teams that we could face from Liga MX, I think you look at Monterrey and Tigres as being two of those teams that you want to face up against, and different challenge. Maybe staying away from Mexico City, which we know is a very difficult one. Not that Monterrey isn't, but it's one of those ones as a club. As I've said, it gives you a good feeling on the challenge that lies ahead.
Yeah, and you mentioned it there. You've gotten to play some of the top clubs, throughout Mexico in the past few years. Some clubs might, shy away from that and maybe want an easier draw, so to speak. Although it's again Champions Cup, so you're not getting an easy draw at all. But how important is it for the club, and how special is it to get to go up against these elite clubs in the region and really measure yourselves, at every aspect of what you're doing, so young in your history as a club?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, you're facing these teams that are in some ways in mid-season form. And that's the one thing we've learned. On the second thing is you just the energy and all of what these teams can bring forward. The energy of playing in these stadiums. I think the guys have really looked forward to the games at Tim Hortons. So it's just one of those other ones, and they're a giant in Mexican football. If we look at the last 10 years and their success, and you look across their roster, I think these are the challenges that Forge enjoys having.
Yeah, absolutely. Bobby, as we've alluded to, you have kind of done this twice now, these trips down to Mexico in the Champions Cup. Obviously, every single one of them is different, but when you look at the last two that you've made and you kind of go about preparing to come into preseason in January to go down, what have you learned, especially maybe from last year's experience, about what you need to do to be at your best in this moment, and maybe what you might do differently from last year?
Yeah, I think first you take the experiences of each one, and you look and you go back to Cruz Azul series, and you say, it's kind of being happy to be there, being happy to participate in this tournament, knowing the difficulty that it brings with it. And last year, I think it was about performance, is we wanted to make sure we can go out and perform and play our football, and I think we showed that over two legs, both at home and away. This one, it's about playing 4 games in this competition. Each year, the challenge needs to be different towards the team and the group. You can't just think the same way. You can't be happy to be there. You can't be, just a part of a competition here. It's about how we extend this, how we go a little bit further. And, we've got a tough draw in front of us. And what we do every time when this comes up is, we get down to work. We analyze things, looking at our best opportunity to go about it. And, I always say the first best opportunity is as cold as possible at Tim Hortons Field in February. We haven't had that in the past 2 fixtures, so maybe we can get one of those for us, because you need every little advantage you can get. The same thing, you look forward to playing down there, making sure that the weather's good. The altitude's a little bit different than Mexico City. So all of that is something you have to prepare for. We'll look now at preseason. We had a few places for our warm weather training that we had earmarked. One of them was Mexico, so it looks like Mexico it will be. And it's an interesting series. There's also a connection when you look at Monterrey and Daniel Parra for us. And how important he's been to the team this year. And there's a little bit of familiarity there.
Yeah, I think it's a team that you've spoken to before. Really quickly before Mitch jumps in with something about that. Something you mentioned there that I find really interesting, Bobby, is about coming into this competition not just happy to be there anymore. It feels like that's something that in the CPL we kind of had to get past in the Canadian Championship for the first couple of years, no longer being happy to go toe-to-toe with the MLS teams and starting now to want to beat them regularly. Is that the next step for a team, especially like you here, who's done it a couple times, to now that you've been here long enough to be more challenging these opponents, like maybe the Costa Rican, the Honduran teams who have done that and been successful at times?
Here's the thing: it's going to happen. That's for sure, because in football everything happens. If we go over the time period, different things happen which may not be expected. And you look at the roster and you look at the value of one team to the other. But here's the thing that's we always talk about. That's always going to occur. A Canadian team will win the Canadian Championship. That's going to occur. A CPL team will go 2-3 rounds in Concacaf Champions Cup. It's going to happen. So why not us? And that's the mentality we always have here at Forge. It's we think big, and you have to. And like I said, it's also a process. I talked about those 2 prior times we've competed in Champions Cup, and the first time it's the glitz and glamour and going down to Azteca and all of that. And last year I think the performance was excellent over 2 legs. The result is not there. Now it's about the result. And that's something we've learned in our process over the years in playing these matches, outside of the Canadian Premier League schedule, both in CONCACAF, first in CONCACAF League and in the Canadian Championship. So all these experiences are excellent for the club. And it also gives the players, the ability to think big because they have been doing this stuff.
What have you learned maybe about roster construction for this? Because I know obviously some of this wasn't in your control in past years and isn't always, but how important is it to get guys, under contract and ready to go early so that you can, get them through preseason? And also how much of a draw is this for guys who want to play, at the highest level and against a club like Monterrey?
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 parts of that. One, it's you obviously want a team, to start, whether that's the first period of February 4th, and that's early, because if it's that, we get together in January 5th. You want to make the right moves to make sure you've got a team that's going to be able to play and compete and do the right things in Champions Cup. You also don't want to throw, all of your signings in for those 2 games, because the one thing we learn is, in the scouting process, good players come along in January. Different things, especially on the foreign front, as some of the other transfer windows close and players are available. So we've had some experience with this in how to work through the different phases of it. We're obviously working harder right now on solidifying some players, and I think we're doing a great job with how we've been scouting, and we'll look at it in the same approach. It's making sure that we've got the team that we believe is ready for these 2 to 4 games and beyond. Making sure that we're also giving ourselves room to work on things ahead of the season in April.
Yeah, it's certainly always a tricky balance for CPL teams playing these CONCACAF games in February and then maybe not starting the league season until April, which obviously can be tough to balance. But Bobby, just on that note, quickly, I just want to talk about kind of where you guys are at this point of your off season. It's been a month since the final, roughly. Put out some roster updates yesterday. How happy are you with the position you're in now, and how different a Forge are you anticipating we see on the pitch in February?
Yeah, I think we're in a good spot. Obviously, we've got players that are signed through next season and options that we've picked up and we'll be announcing over the next couple of weeks. Already moving on some new players, and we'll have some of those announcements coming up. And I think this is going into year 7, and that's crazy to say. We've been around here for a while, but this is usually the year where we have a little bit more turnover than every other one. And that's exciting to be honest, because you can move things a little bit, you can reshape things that maybe you want to improve, and that's always a hard thing to say when you're talking about Forge. We've had a lot of success and we do a great job on the field, but there's always areas as a coach you'd not only like to improve, but you'd like to change, maybe bring a new dimension to the game tactically, different things that maybe weren't there in the last year or 2. Can you change those things up? So I think it's an exciting time, and the process of how we work in our recruitment and our scouting has started early into the middle and of this past season. So we're at a good spot, and more to get into the new year.
Well, I mean, you mentioned a couple times around the final that you feel like things maybe go in 3-year cycles, so that feels like an interesting tease for what might be to come and what we might see from Forge over the next couple of months. But either way, as I said to Tommy, Bobby, I'm sure you're excited to get a little bit of that Mexican sunshine in February anyway. I'm sure you'll hear a lot from us over the next few weeks and months, Bobby, but otherwise, I hope you have a really great holiday, and thank you very, very much for giving us your time this evening.
Sounds good. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Bobby. Mitchell, this is always an exciting part of the year. I mean, I'd say always, but it's the second time that we've had this moment of the year, really. But it feels like it's becoming a tradition where we get 2 CPL teams, one day maybe 3, when a CPL team wins the Canadian Championship, learning what massive clubs they get to go and play in February. And as Bobby said, important to start that evolution of not being happy to be there and going in to really make some noise in this competition and maybe catch one of these big clubs off guard. Mitch, just any final thoughts on how exciting it is to finally know, what we'll be looking at in February in this Concacaf Champions Cup?
Yeah, I think it's very exciting. And I think that's a point well made by Bobby, because I think both of these clubs will approach it that way. I think there was maybe a little bit of Cavalry last season, and fair enough. This is their first time in continental competition. They'd earned this of maybe, being happy to be there and getting dipping their toes in a little bit. But I don't think after winning and having that taste of winning the North Star Cup this year, that's going to be the case again. And if you're Forge again, that's really the next step in this. You've gone toe to toe with 2 Mexican giants already. Now it's time to really show that you can beat one of these teams. And I think that's exciting, because I think there is a bit of a mentality shift in how these teams are going to approach these games and in the learnings that they've had so far. And again, like Bobby said, everything happens in football. There's so much opportunity for a real upset, and it would be so big for this league if one of these teams can be the first to do that.
Absolutely. Well, I just hope that we get to see it sometime in the relatively near future. Maybe this year, who knows? Anyway, either way, always a really, really special moment to see these CPL teams competing on the continental stage. Before we go, speaking of draws, there is one other draw for a cup competition happening this week. Tune in to One Soccer on Thursday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. If you want to see the TELUS Canadian Championship draw, where we find out the paths to the Voyageurs Cup for all 8 Canadian Premier League teams, as well as the 3 MLS teams and the League One Canada representatives. That's always a lot of fun too. We love that competition here. Mitch, I'm sure that's one that we are also going to be very, very excited to see some of those matchups.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's the start of the journey to next year's Concacaf Champions Cup as well. So it all kind of ties together. But yeah, competition that seems to get better and better every year as it expands, as these clubs get older. And as some of these upsets that we've seen in past years have happened. So incredibly excited to see what all 8 matchups look like for the CPL clubs, or at least what all 8 clubs draw. So yeah, that's going to be one that's must watch as well.
Absolutely. And make sure you head over to campl.ca or follow at CPL Soccer on social media for all kinds of covers that you need about both the Canadian Championship and, of course, 2025 Concacaf Champions Cup. We'll be there the whole way. Very excited to have you with us. Thank you very, very much for joining in tonight. For Mitchell Tierney, I've been Charlie O'Connor Clark, and we thank you very much.